We've got an amazing guest on today's show for you guys, and I'm super excited to bring on an individual that has an incredible resume. He won multiple amateur national championships at Loretta's. So when you want to navigate amateur motocross, who better to ask than somebody who's been there and accomplished that? He went on to have a storied pro career with multiple years on factory teams at Factory Honda, Factory KTM. He's still involved within the industry doing testing and riding and stuff like that. He actually won an amateur national championship just this year at the Spring a Ding 450 class, which is funny because he's 40 plus years old. I believe he's 42. Welcome to the show, none other than Andrew Short. And we think the theme of today's show should be drive and passion. If you have the passion, Shorty believes you can make it happen.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Coach Robb Podcast Network, another episode of Navigating Amateur Motocross. I am beyond, I'm like a kid in a candy store right now. As you guys know, I'm still a big fanboy of the sport, and we have none other than the man himself, Mr. Andrew Short. How you doing today, Andrew?
Doing good. Just landed here in San Diego. I'm headed to Paula for round one of motocross. Kind of excited to see what this is all about. I'm headed there to help with the AMA as a rider representative. I did one other event this year, kind of a snapshot of what they do and have going on. And so I'm trying to help in this aspect, give back. And I don't know how many rounds I'll do, but I'm excited to go there and hopefully help, but also check out the races.
What does that role actually include?
I don't know necessarily. I'm just kind of learning as we go.
Okay.
But some of the races, they had some instances where, specifically with the Red Cross, when that came out, and they have a great group with Jeremy Albright, who's from the technical side. Thule Pelletier is the main guy who spearheads all this stuff. So the first time I was at the races at Nashville, it was kind of just to observe, and if someone needed me, I was there. But to expand on this role and try to learn and help from the riders, for safety or just making decisions moving forward, I think they want to expand on this role. I heard also Ezra Luss may get involved. Hopefully they can get some more riders. It's hard to find someone that's neutral, that isn't tied to a brand, or that's in the position where they can give back and help. So hopefully in the future, more people or more riders specifically can give back and help and make it better racing for the riders and a better atmosphere, and they can have more trust. So I think a lot of the things the AMA does, they do really good. There's some things that obviously they could improve, and that's all of us. So you can sit there and complain, or you can get involved and try to help. So I definitely don't want to do 30 races a year, but I told him I would do 6 or 7, and this year I'm going to do 3. But my calendar is pretty busy with amateur motocross with my kid and being a dad and riding myself.
Derek, are you aware of this? I didn't know they were even putting something like this together.
I'm aware of it as of today's show.
Okay.
Yeah, officially. So Andrew just touched on something that I think is key to this podcast. And he said, instead of bitching about it, go out and do something. That's like a personal accountability that is required to be successful, I think, especially in motocross. So kind of on that topic, but not, what shaped who you are as a rider today, or now that your career is, on the tail end side? But Andrew, who was instrumental in your career, if anyone, early on, maybe in your amateurs, that helped give you that accountability and made you become who you are, if there was anybody like that?
I think we're all just a direct reflection of who we grew up, our parents or whoever our leader, like our father figure or parent role. We're all kind of direct reflection, the good and the bad and the ugly, right? Obviously, Donnie Hansen, he moved to Colorado when I was 13 or something. So I spent a lot of time with him. And from the foundation aspect, I think he was great. More importantly, Josh was a year or two younger than me. So I had a good person to ride with. I love Josh, especially as a kid. He was really technical. So we spent a lot of time play riding and just being kids on dirt bikes. So between those two things, I think obviously your parents shape you the most, or whoever is in that role. And so, yeah, I'm thankful that I had good parents, but I've always loved racing and riding. That's always been a part of me since I was a little kid. And I kind of had that passion inside me. So, but I think all of us are kind of that way, right?
Go ahead, Derek.
Let's say, how good of an amateur would you say you were? And you're from Colorado. When we had a conversation not too long ago, you had said you guys would go down to California at
Yeah.
times. Maybe that was later on or whenever, but kind of go back, just maybe walk us back through your amateur career. And then at what point do you think, you realized, not do I just love this, which every kid does, but maybe I'm good enough to become some form of a pro?
Yeah, it's weird. Even when you do turn pro, I think you're always kind of like waiting for plan B or backup because you're one injury away, or it's just really difficult. I don't know if that was my parents, like what we mentioned. My parents really valued education, going to school. Uh, as a kid growing up in Colorado, I didn't even know if it was possible to make it. I thought you had to be a kid from California, basically, essentially, to make it and have the connections and the speed and the resources to do all this. So I was really uneducated in a lot of those aspects just because I only knew what was around me. I wasn't at those races. I started going to amateur nationals when I was like, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, somewhere around there. My first one was Ponca City, and I wasn't very good. The first time I went to Loretta's, I got lapped by Ricky Carmichael. I was in the super mini class, and I was like maybe 12, but it's the only class I made it in. So by no means was I an outstanding amateur. I loved racing, and really the only reason we started going to amateur nationals is I would crush it locally in Colorado. But when the Tedescos or Johnsons, people like that would come up there like, hey, you really need to go to like some bigger races and like kind of expand. That was their nice way of saying you're a big fish in a small pond. So once we did that, our eyes were opened, and I don't know. From there, I started dreaming as a kid. Like that's what I wanted to do. I was fully into it. So by no means was I super fast. I never won Loretta's till my last year. I was maybe 16 or 17, probably 17 in the pro class. I was also the same year that Stewart turned pro. So I did pro sport. He did A. At the time, I had like a tryout ride with Mitch. He said I had to win both classes if I wanted the deal for the next year. I only won one. So the other one I got second. There was a mud moto and I kind of blew it. I finished sixth, seventh, eighth. And so yeah, that's kind of a little quick snapshot of where I was. But in Colorado, it's not exactly the ideal place to grow up as a kid. Some things were really good. We had a great local Supercross series, which helped me a lot later on. But from the amateur motocross side, it wasn't good.
Did you grow up? Did your dad race?
He rode a little bit. My dad was a dentist, so when he broke
Okay.
his wrist, that wasn't great.
Yeah.
He KO'd himself really good, and he couldn't hardly talk for them. I think after that, he was like, he had a lot of heart, not a lot of technique. And my dad was a great athlete, like stick and ball stuff, and he would get smoked by people, like literally smoking a cigarette on the line, and just frustrated him so bad because it was a technique sport, kind of like a life sport. Those guys been riding since they were little kids. It really frustrated them. So he loved riding, but he wasn't super quick. And then once I started going, as a dad, you don't have time to ride yourself, or the financial side of it, I think was difficult. Time, energy, money, all those things.
Yep.
Every parent can relate. So yeah, that's just kind of how it was.
Now, Derek, I don't know if he picked up on it. He gets lapped at 12 years old at Loretta's and then wins the pro sport at 17. What in the world would you contribute that much incremental progress over that 5-year window? Was that all in Colorado, or did you relocate to California? How in the world did you get that far that
No,
quick?
I think if you want something bad enough, you'll figure it out. That's what I always tell kids, it's
Yeah.
like, oh, we need to go here. Or they value all these other, like a training facility or a bike or a workout program, or it's not just one thing. So for you to say, hey, how'd you go,
Right.
and that's one thing that I truly believe hasn't changed since I was a kid. A lot of things have changed with racing and everything's evolved, obviously, as you know, with fitness, or Derek with bikes. Um, Everything's always moving, right? And we learn from the past. But me, it was just observing, learning, the will to want to be better personally. And for me also, I had to understand how I worked also. I couldn't go somewhere and just crush it. I had to learn, study it, go back home and think about it, process it, and then gradually I get better. That's how I've always been. It's like whoops or supercross. If I could sit there and work and go through them over and over and over, eventually I would get it. Where other kids could look at it and just grasp it and conquer it really easy. So for me, I don't know if I'm a slow learner or that's just how I work, but it took me a few years. But once I figured it out, I knew what to expect. I could prepare myself for that and do well.
Hey, Derek, you and I have talked a lot about the difference between public school and, homeschool or private school. Shorty, you had mentioned that education was big in your family. Did they keep you in public school or were you able to go to homeschool? What'd you do?
Yeah, no, I graduated high school just because my parents really instilled college and that whole route.
Yeah,
Yes, they valued education, and some of their best memories I think are from college and that time period in their life. So, but me, I love dirt bikes. That's all I could dream about.
sure.
I did not want to go to school. So when I graduated high school, I packed gear bags, moved to California with like Hanson, this kid Andy Backen, Logan Darien, other kids from Colorado, California, and just lived the moto dream. Like I mentioned earlier, um, Mitch, I didn't get that deal, so I moved to Motor World Suzuki. It was the B team for Suzuki. It was perfect because I had no pressure. I could race every weekend, and I wasn't expected to win, and I could grow. So, but during that time, when I was living out of a gear bag, all I did was ride and learn and observe from the older riders. Like David Pingree was one of my teammates, people like that, and learn the technical side as well, how to test. My dad wasn't a great mechanic. We didn't have a lot of resources, and so also it allowed me to grow in all the different aspects, I guess, with racing. So
You had
slowly but
mentioned,
surely, kind of get it.
yeah, you had mentioned learn how to test. So in your pro career, that became a huge aspect of what kept you maybe on board with factory efforts later in your career, I believe.
Yeah.
But that obviously, as you're saying, was shaped early in your career. How do you, like, I try to tell parents that if you're not working with your kid, maybe not super young, but maybe once they're 10, 12, 11, 11, 12 on 85s and then onwards towards helping them understand how to develop their motorcycle, then you're doing
Yeah.
them a disservice down the road. Now that you're a dad and you're so knowledgeable, how do you pass that on to your son?
Well, I want him to work on his bike for one. I wasn't very good at this, just to understand. Like even last night we were riding, and I was tweaking and put a different rear brake on his rear brake, and it didn't have enough play on it. It locked up. He just rode it till it completely like stopped. I'm like, "Where's Hudson?" And the thing was like smoking. He stopped. He's like, "It just locked up." So like things like this, I'm not. I want him to learn and understand so he can figure it out. And same with off road. That's what I love about off road. Moto is great. Off road, once he leaves that starting line, he's like by himself. So if he crashes or rides over his head, the bike breaks, he's the one who has to get it out or figure it out. So those are some things that I valued that I wish I would have learned a little sooner, I guess, or not be so self-reliant on other people, just understanding my machine. And like I said earlier, when I learned there was value in testing, for one, it's going to give me a better motorcycle on race day. I could adapt better than the other riders. If it was soft, I knew how to adjust my suspension, um, just to get me more comfortable, whether it was tire size, profile tire pressure, motor thing, like little tricks. And I had to learn this just by observing with older teammates or people that had the same skill set. And you start like seeing them change gear and you're like, why are they changing? You start thinking slowly. I learned all these things. And then it was an advantage for me because I could adapt faster than the other riders. I could be more comfortable. And I just didn't realize this early on, or no one told me. Um, they're not going to share. They don't want me to be more competitive or beat them. So
Is
I had to learn these things just by observing. And once I did, I realized it was kind of like hitting a whoop section over and over and over. If I got good at it, and it would help me. And so I valued that stuff as well. And like you said, it kept me in a job because some of the other riders weren't very good at testing or would sit there and work with the team. So these were some things that were good for me down the road.
Did you
would you
keep
say
like
that's
notes? Sorry,
no,
coach.
pardon me. Good. I was just curious. Andrew, would you say that's more your personality, or was that something that your dad instilled in you? Because the common word that's come up, and Derek and I talk a lot about it, is learning. And
Yeah.
there's a reason why I'm asking. Would you say that that's your personality, or was that the environment your dad cultivated in you?
Mm, I don't think it had so much to do with it was just I recognized that to be good, that's what I wanted. I don't know. I don't think my
Because
dad was very detail oriented like that. He
okay,
valued more the experience or just doing good. That's pretty broad, right?
yeah,
He didn't understand. That's why I feel like my dad, I'm super thankful. He spent a lot of time, energy, and money, like I said earlier, getting me all over the place.
yeah.
But he didn't understand the importance of this, or maybe we valued like just changing yeah, like Derek could go on and on about all the stories about parents, I'm sure. And I don't want to become one of those. And here I am doing Loretta Lynn's and all this other craziness. So, but my dad, from the technical aspect, this was not his strength. So this is just something I learned later on and I valued once I felt the difference myself and I could recognize that the difference it made in other riders, that I'm like, okay, this is just another piece to the puzzle.
And the reason why I ask is Derek and I have talked ever since our first show together. So many of these young kids get a red carpet ride to the point that they know nothing. That's why when you
Yeah.
first started out today talking about your parents valued education, I love the idea that, at least in my opinion, I think education is teaching you how to think.
Yeah.
You know, you hear that all the time. And we see some of these young kids don't even know how to change an air filter, don't know how to tighten their chain. And I think to myself, what an incredible disservice. So it falls under this same umbrella of what does learning actually look like? I understand time is money, money is time. The parents are like, look, I don't have the time for you to figure it out. Let me just do it. And then we have enough resources. We put you on a pay to play program.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing everything. They're washing your bike. They're cleaning the bike. You've got a suspension specialist. He's dialing the bike in because he's looking at it from the side. And the rider just never really grows in the area of learning. That's why I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but you really piqued my interest because Derek and I have talked so much about people are, I don't know why, but they're trepidatious to learn. It's okay to say, I don't know, but if I don't know, how do I figure it out? Like you said, you're inquisitive as to, because when you talk about blitzing whoops, I think it fits right in the same wheelhouse. That's why I was asking if that was just your MO. Hey, I'm not the guy that's going to go full send in the whoops, but give me a couple hours to work on them and I'll deductively figure it out. I think that comes with, it matches your learning. You know, that's your characteristics. Would you say that you would agree or disagree with that now that you're a moto dad, quote unquote, teaching your son?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a time and a place for it too. I think, at first you need to learn the fundamentals of riding, and ride for fun and do all these things as you're growing through that process. And if you're a kid who's going to get to that highest level, then you better start, that's another piece to the puzzle in my opinion.
Yeah.
A lot of these kids maybe don't value it at the time because they've leaned and been so dependent on other people setting their bikes up. So it's just, I don't know what the right solution is, and it's different for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
But for me, it was important.
You are, so you were I'm actually a similar learner to you. I'm a muscle memory type guy. I have to do it over and over again to figure it out. And then once I have it kind of subconscious, I can do it well. Would you say your son has some of those qualities, or is he a little bit different than you?
Yeah, he's different than me, and maybe not as visual. He's more like his mama, so, and my daughter's like me, with the sports aspect. So, he's really smart and maybe analytical in a different way, I guess. But that's why I say it's all personal, right? And to me, this is where I said it. If you want it bad enough, you'll figure it out. And when you recognize there's a weakness somewhere, then maybe it's time to devote some attention over here. Or maybe if that's your limiting factor and you can't adapt on race day and the technical side will help, then you got to go push over here a little bit. But if you don't have the speed, it doesn't matter how good your bike's working, right? So I think it's just recognizing all these things, keeping balance. That's anything in life. And understanding that there is value in this, but there's value in all these. That's what's so cool about dirt bikes. There's value. There's so many different pieces to that puzzle that it's like endless. So I feel like that's just one of them. Maybe it's overlooked nowadays, and you guys have mentioned it with the younger generation that they don't recognize that importance. But soon enough, if they want it bad enough, and that's the difference, then they'll figure it out.
How old is Hudson?
Go ahead.
How old is Hudson?
He's 13.
Okay. And what class is he in this year?
He rides the 10 to 12 on the 85 class.
So with his methodology of learning and not jeopardizing the father-son relationship, how in the world do you manage that landscape?
We're on the fun program.
I love it.
No, I want him to be internally motivated. I don't want like the external motivation.
Yep.
I feel like it's not sustainable. Plus, I've seen the other side of it, I want it to be like I know very few people make it, and if he wants to make it, this is what I say over and over. I just don't want to be in that position where I cross that boundary, and I want it to be fun. I want him to have a good experience. I still want him to ride a motorcycle when he's done. quote unquote racing, at a
Sure.
serious level. And we've never been that serious until this year. And now he's the one who's like almost too into it. He gets so frustrated, mentally, physically. He's like all in. And it's like, to me, it's silly. He gets so mad. I'm like, dude, no one's paying you. No one cares. And the only thing I care about right now is his attitude. So for
Yeah.
us, it's hard because he just wants it to happen. And I think we've all felt that, all three of us, right? When you want it that bad and you just want to like snap your finger and like, but it takes time and it is not something that happens overnight. So
You said
it's fun for
something
me to
that,
watch, but it's frustrating too.
yeah, I bet. I think it's funny because you have the perspective of been there, done that, whereas he's
Yeah.
not been there yet. So you're like,
Yeah.
hey, but he's your son and you got to let him grow, which is, it's interesting. I would say you said
Yeah.
something that I totally agree with. What I wish more people would do is I think you need to take a self-assessment or have someone around you, which is what a parent figure truly can do if they do it right,
Yeah.
which is to evaluate your weaknesses.
Yeah.
So maybe not in a manner that we try to bring in this podcast is to tell parents, hey, you can't just beat up on your kid, especially at the race. If they're not fast
Yeah.
in a corner or they're slower here or whatever, you can't
Mhm.
fix that on race day sometimes if they're just not good enough at it yet. So they're going to have to take that home with you and work on it. But
Yeah.
your analogy there was, find your weaknesses, improve your weaknesses. And actually, it reminds me of a comedian. I think I don't even want to get the name wrong, but one of these prominent comedians had once said, how does his process work for his specials? And he said that he would take his worst joke and try
Mhm.
to turn it into his best joke throughout the year.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the year, every single one of those jokes that he stuck with became
Mhm.
what became his special. So it was like
Yeah.
taking your weaknesses and making them strong, but that was a conscious effort on his part. And I think the same applies to moto. If you're a little bit getting tired at the end of motos, you
Yeah.
really need to address why that is. If you're
Yeah.
just off half a second a lap, you need to address what that is. And you're going to find a new
Yeah.
weakness every time you fix a problem. But if
Yeah.
you're only going to go, people do this all the time. I mean, we're all guilty of it. We like to put our time into things we're good at because it's validating. So a
Yeah.
lot of people go work the things over and over again that they already like and are already good at when you really should put your time into the areas that you're most weak at.
Yeah.
Did that come on early for you? Or when did you start as kind of self-assessing? Like at what age were you like, hey, this is a weakness, I need to fix it?
It happened so slow. And uh for me, it was just observing, like how others prepared. And I really wasn't able to do that until I was around older professionals and basically other teammates. Um, just by asking questions and understanding, yeah, there were certain weaknesses. But now I look back, like even for Hudson, it's so easy for me to put together like a little program to prepare and to do all that, we're going to do this, and that, we're going to do starts, we're going to practice some intensity, and we're going to go good from the gun. And then after that, like, and then we'll do all intensity one day. And then the next day, where I think back when I was 13, I was just out in the field riding a dirt bike. Like there was no structure. The foundation was very vanilla, I would say. My technique wasn't great, but I was just riding because I love to ride. And so sometimes I catch myself and I don't want to go too, or I feel like you're going to lose the passion or the feeling and all that. And it gets too strong. I feel like it's going to get lost.
I asked
So
this.
I don't, yeah, to answer your question, I feel like it's so everyone rides for a different reason. And that learning process is going to be so different for all of them. So this is what I valued and this is what I learned. And uh, I, I just don't want, it's different when you're a parent, like for me, it's super easy because I'm goal oriented and I can understand to get there. So I think it's difficult when you're with kids and when it's your own kid. So for parents, they want it to happen. They don't necessarily know how to get there and how to communicate that gets lost, I feel like sometimes. So, and for every person, there's not the right or wrong answer.
I always say there's that. When does that day come where swinging a leg over the motorcycle transition from I'm riding my dirt bike to training?
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you on that. Has your son ever directly or indirectly shared with you that he is Andrew Short's son and there's a lot of hidden pressures? Or are these his frustrations because he is just focusing on himself and not meeting his own expectations?
No, it's definitely up to him. Like he's
Okay.
the one, but he's like, I wish you could just go do it for me sometime, like he's like, because I'm like, no, it's maybe I'm not communicating well. And so for me, sometimes I just assume things, and he hasn't been riding for that long. But for me, I'm super visual. So if I watch another guy on a supercross track, I know exactly how fast to hit it. I don't ask them, hey, what gear are you in? Are you hitting it
Sure.
third gear pinned or, half throttle? I can watch them come out of the whoops, turn, and so I can visualize that. So I'm super visual. I can watch video, I can learn other lines, and I can picture what that would feel like. Um, so like even in those instances today on the plane, we're flying out here, I can notice sometimes as he's becoming more mature, just the mentality. So I brought books for him to read, that were that meant something to me and helped me along that process. So I don't know, certain things like that. And those were other coaches and athletes that gave me those books or shared them. And then I would share some of my favorites with them back. And I think there's a lot of that community aspect that's really helped and other people. And I'm sure, Rob, you've seen this with your athletes and maybe even other coaches in your community sharing that knowledge. And when something
Absolutely.
finally clicks, how cool it is. You're like, oh, yeah. And then you see the results
Yes.
and it's that much more contagious and addicting, because you're like, oh, man, I wish I would have done this. And then you try to find what's next. And it's so much fun when it does start to go and to see that passion go. So for a parent also, it's like you put in that hard work, you try to develop, and one thing leads to another, and it can take off. So
You bring up
that's my goal.
what I call the big C word, and that's confidence. Derek and I talk about this all
Yeah,
the time. There's no measuring device inside the human body to measure confidence. So in my
yeah,
world, I live in a world of zeros and ones. You're either fitter,
yeah,
faster, you're going faster at a lower heart rate. And yes, we have some wearable devices that makes the understanding of the information a little bit
yeah,
easier to digest. But at the end of the day, and I say this to everybody I've ever had the privilege of working with, yes, I have 268 amateur national titles. I have 4 AMA number one plates. If that matters to you, that's cool.
yeah,
But what matters is A, I have to earn your trust and confidence.
yeah,
And then I have to build confidence through quantification of improvement. And
mhm,
that's where I think the fun factor comes in because I understand your visual. You've already articulated that. You can see it, you can dial it in. Well, some
yeah,
people are doers. They have to, like
mhm,
Derek said, he's got to do it a million times and then he internalizes it. And there it is.
yeah,
So that's why we have videos, we have stuff in print, we have stuff in audio. Because I had a trig teacher in high school, and Derek, we talked a little bit about it. Mrs. Yor, here I am in high school, and no exaggeration, I'm not being malicious. She was the oldest teacher in the state of Florida. She was
yeah.
your old bitter
Old
grandma.
school. Yeah,
Yeah, and she would walk in a little itty bitty thing, didn't weigh 80 pounds, and she walked in and she was just very curt. She goes, until I put it in a format that you get it, you'll never get it. And it
yeah,
gives me goosebumps saying it because to this day, I say that every day. My
yeah,
responsibility to serve you is to put it in a format that resonates with you as a parent and
yeah,
resonates with you as an athlete. You're still, and I say this over and over again, I don't ever want to jeopardize the father-son relationship, the mom racer athlete. Please don't blow that relationship because when racing's said and
yeah.
done, what have you got left? Like you said, still want the love of dirt bikes, still want to have a relationship. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the three of us know a lot of people who don't even communicate with their mom and dad.
So
And that's
short,
Yeah,
sad.
yeah, yeah.
short, Andrew, you love riding motorcycles. It's
Yeah.
so awesome for me to see like you still ride. You're actually the reigning, probably the most important championship you ever won, if I had to guess, reigning Spring a Ding 450 Open Pro champion over here. But it's
Yeah.
absolutely awesome to see that you love riding dirt bikes. So you've
Yeah.
done it rally racing, like Dakar Rally, which is amazing. And then you like to, from social media, do trips and go to Colorado and go all over the US and
Yeah.
just ride your motorcycle, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that was kind of the case for you when you were young. You rode, you didn't really have a program, you just loved to ride. Did when you what how so what the question I have is for most amateurs, how important do you think like having a program is now today? Because everybody seems to be on a quote unquote program.
Hmm.
Or do you think for the love of the sport, that's just more key? Like how fit and how prepared were you when you were at Loretta's that last year versus how fit and prepared were you 5 years later as a professional?
It was always a constant evolution, but it scares me. I think as you get older, I think and you're more mature, then you can put more on. But like what Rob was saying, you can measure everything. And today, I don't think that's good for kids. And I, and that's my personal opinion. You can put
Mhm.
so much power into that. And ultimately, it doesn't matter. This is what I told my kid yesterday. I go, it doesn't matter if you get the whole shot on this guy on practice day. All that matters is on race day. Everyone lines up behind the gate, and whoever gets to the checkered flag first, that's all that matters. You won't remember any of this other stuff, you know?
Yep.
And you can get so focused on that other stuff. So when I was getting ready for Loretta's in my B year, yeah, I put a lot of time in. I had no hour meter on my bike. I have no idea how many hours that thing had on, but it had a lot. I had no heart rate monitor, you know, and we would do a top end when that thing got slow, not when it had 10 hours on it or whatever, you know. It's like life was so much different back then. So for me to say I was super prepared, like my B year at Loretta's, like, yeah, that was in my head. So was that confidence or was there actual some
Exactly.
numbers behind it? Because I had a
Exactly.
notebook where I did like, 15, 20-minute motos plus one. And I wouldn't even do sprints. And yeah, I rode all the time. And, but that's what burned me out, like on motocross. And I loved motocross as a kid. I never trail rode in Colorado, very,
Mhm.
very little did I. But when I got done racing, I went to do a KTM rider rally, and I'm like, this is sweet. It was like a big adventure and checking out the mountains. And I was on some big adventure bike, which was super lame, but I thought it was cool just because it was something different and it was quote unquote a dirt bike. And so I felt like a kid again. So it scares me like to tell people, oh, you need to be on this program, or were you super prepared when you went to Loretta's? Like, yeah, I think I was, and I felt good, I looked good, but I don't know if I, truly, I don't know. Um, was I as fit as I was when I was riding a 250F or factory Honda? No, I wasn't even completely close to being the same physically, mentally, bike wise. One year at Loretta's, I ran out of gas on the last lap winning because my float was stuck. I mean, that tells you
Uh,
like, where everything was at in our program. So it was super loose, but at the same time, we were all in. Does that make sense? Like all the energy and time we had went into racing. But what that looked like now, like looking back, like it was a mess. So I don't think I've said this over and over. There's not a perfect scenario. Like you need to go race because you love to race, you have passion, and do it to be your best. And if that's not your best, go find something else that makes you happy. It's like there's so much risk you're taking and all these other things. Like for me, it didn't matter. And same like, when you talk about I did Dakar, dude, it's the coolest race ever. But it is horrible when you see someone pass away on the side, that just lost their life. But I was at the place in my life when I was doing that, like I was at peace if something happened to me,
Mhm.
because I love to ride. It was the coolest adventure ever. And I feel like I was living a million lives when I was doing it. Like I felt so blessed that if that happened, I was okay with it. And I knew my family would be okay. And that sounds really selfish and bad, I guess, in that aspect. But that's what makes me tick. Like still to this day, I don't really get paid to ride a dirt bike, but I love to ride. Like I rode last night.
Mhm.
And as soon as I get home from this race, I'm gonna ride again on Sunday because that's what I love to do. Um, and so when that day changes, then I won't ride or whatever. And now it's awesome because my kid loves to ride, and now I've like created this animal, which is bad because now we have double the bike work and more filters to wash and more gear, like all these things. So I think that's what people should be more worried about is like trying to be all in. And to be all in for all three of us is going to look different, right? And you need to find what makes you tick and what going to Loretta. Like for my son, it's going to be hard for him to make Loretta's. And if he makes Loretta's, we're going to be super stoked. And if he doesn't, we're going to be super bummed and go work on some things to try again next year. But some people, when they go to Loretta's, they expect to win, right? So I think it's everybody's on this journey and it's going to look different, but you have to give yourself permission that it's okay with wherever you're at. And one thing also I learned is I always wanted more as a racer, and I would win a race and it's like I almost just pulled a tear off and was already focused on the next race. I really wish I would have like celebrated for the night and enjoyed it, and like I always wanted more, and I think that served me well. But for the kids that do get to Loretta's, they need to be happy and like celebrate and make the most of it because you're only going to go there a few times. Do your best. Sure, you got to keep balance in everything. But those are some of the things that I feel like I look back on and go, man, I wish I would have done this a little different, or I wish I would have enjoyed a little more because it wasn't a question of effort for me. Because as you can tell, like I love to ride and that's all I think about. So I think keeping the balance, but also understanding why you ride and why you do things each time.
So you said something there that I think there's a lot of topics you said there, but expectations is one of them.
Yeah.
One of the things I think it frustrates me with the families we work with is a lot of them like put these expectations on, we're going to go to Loretta's and get this result. And I'm like looking outwardly going, I don't think so.
Yeah.
What have your results been up to this date? So what are you doing to get closer? Why don't we set expectations that like, hey, realistically, you're currently at a 25th or a 30th or a 15th.
Yeah.
Why don't you set the expectation of why don't we like really shoot for that 10th or that, that one step forward? But
Yeah.
I don't, some of these families, like it's a complete waste of a week and it wasn't fun if we're not going to get these, hit these expectations of a top 5 when the reality was you weren't a top 5 person coming into the, Loretta's. So setting realistic expectations, I think with your son, if you guys make Loretta's and you said you would be stoked, that is awesome. You made Loretta's. That should be a huge accomplishment for your son and you should be happy with that. And then the other thing you said was maybe take a little more time to celebrate when you do well. I used to have an athlete who was out of Texas, first really, really fast kid that I worked with when I literally just started my business, and his name was Jimmy Taylor, and he passed away, unfortunately, really young, but he was young and like, he was like 11 and he acted like he was 18, like he was just like, because his dad, didn't have a lot of resources. So he would just drop him off at all the local pros' house at like age 6 and like fast guys, and they would take him to the track. So he acted like he was, way older than he was. But having said that, he was really good to work with, but also really hard because he was very mature. He was very smart, very good with the bike. It was great to work with him, but he was hard to work with because if he didn't win, it was like the worst day of the, on the planet.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, if he won, it was like, okay, whatever, no big deal. Let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
There was no like gratification. And I never remember telling him we're at Oak Hill or Whitney, or I think it was both actually back to back in the day. And he, Cincerillo had like won his 92nd amateur national championship or whatever he won. Right. And he's on the podium, like the happiest human being I've ever seen in my life. Just cheering, he's super pumped and he's like really excited. And I told the kid, I said, look, I'll put up with your crap if that's what you look like on your successful days. I said, but I'm not going to put up with your crappiness if you're going to not be that on your successful days. And I think that a lot of families need to understand that you have to celebrate your successes and be joyful and be happy because it takes a crew around you. And that crew could be your family. It could be your mechanic. It could be your best friends. It could be whoever. But if you don't bring them along on that journey and they don't get to share that success with you and that happiness that you really have, you're not going to get where you want to go.
Yeah, I agree with you. And something also I learned along the way with expectations is, like you mentioned, a number. Like that's a dangerous trap. I feel like, if you did your best, if you rode well, and some days that's a third, some days that's a 10th, some days that's a first. But when you put all these labels and on with the number and all that stuff, I think you're limiting yourself in a bad way and a good way, because if you get third and you're happy, but you were a first place rider that day, that's not good either. And I think you always have to be hungry and keep pushing. But when you put the numbers on there, I feel like I don't think that's it's a limiting factor I found for myself.
And what, if I may add to what you guys were just saying, when I'm working with any young athlete, particularly one that has not hit puberty yet, believe it or not, Andrew, all of my work is done trying to show the parents the threshold that you're about to surpass. Because where's that point of diminishing returns? For me, a fitness program for a prepubescent type of athlete is freeze tag on the playground. How many push-ups and pull-ups can you do? Just body weight stuff so you don't stunt growth, you don't goof up the growth plates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The majority of the work that I do with young athletes is really getting the parent. That's where the wearable device helps. Is I'm not using it as a device to cattle prod you to do the work, because I agree with you. It has to come from the gut. If the athlete wants to do it, it's about making sure that and I tell these parents, and I know you've seen it because you're both a parent as well as a pro, you're doing more than the pros are doing.
Yeah.
Do you recognize, go talk to your local pro, go talk to whoever you can communicate with, ask them what their ride schedule is.
Yeah.
They're riding Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They might put an hour on the bike. You guys are putting 3.5 hours a day at a facility 5 days a week. Do you not realize the path you're on? Because when you look at how many athletes in our sport deal with adrenal fatigue, that's an avoidable disease. That's a byproduct of doing too much, whether that's too much volume, too much intensity, not enough calories. And then you guys brought up the idea of, Derek, you were saying how he doesn't, that individual that you were helping out doesn't really take the time to enjoy it. Andrew, you said you wish you'd kind of taken the time to actually let it sink in.
Yeah.
with our coaching program, I always ask, what is your reward system? I have a chiropractor client and he has a sign in his x-ray room and he says, I want to go back to the days when M&Ms were more valuable than money. And I just think that's such a
That's
powerful,
awesome.
because at 5, right, M&Ms are where it's at. And then at
Yeah.
10, for some of these kids, it might be getting their first cell phone. And then at 15, it's getting your driver's license. And then at
Yeah.
17, it's maybe buying your first truck.
Mhm.
Those, but where's the reward? And a lot of times people are like, oh, you're just trying to pussify my son. And I'm like, hold on here. I liked what you said, Andrew. We're not getting paid to go race right now.
Yeah.
So where's the reward in it? That's why I do like to have some level of quantification. Like you said, the numbers can be both limiting or they can be empowering. I
Yeah.
always try to change the perspective of the parents. We're only quantifying things to empower the athlete. I mean, let's face it, if you don't see that there's some little, I always use math as an example. If an athlete isn't understanding what 2 + 2 is, and he can't get that memorized, he's
Yeah.
not going to be motivated to keep doing more of it. He's got to see, oh, I am correct. I know what
Yeah.
2 + 2 is. And as elementary as that illustration may be, and again, I'm going to throw some moto parents under the bus here, and I apologize. Your athlete, I love what you said, Andrew. Hey, if we make Loretta's, we're simply going to be happy. But I've seen people that's like, well, if we just make Loretta's, we'll be happy. Then they go and they get 35th, and they're like, we should have been top 20. And then if they thought they were going to get top 20, well, we should have been top 10. Well,
Yeah.
we should have been it. My point is as soon as the athlete gets close to the target, they move the target. And the athlete
Yeah.
is no different than a dog. You keep teasing a dog with a treat, you never give it to him. Eventually the dog's like, I'm out. This is
Yeah.
ridiculous. And that's what's so interesting with what we're talking about today. We've talked about reward system. We talked about where's the fun factor. When is it that you transition to, yeah, you realize you've got a talent. And Derek, you'd asked that question. And Andrew, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on it, when did you realize, hey, I might be pretty good at this and could possibly make a living?
I never knew. And that was,
I love it.
I think that was from my parents, it's like they always wanted me to have a backup plan because they didn't think it was like almost quote unquote possible. So when I was riding for Factory Honda and had been there for a while, 5, 6 years, it's like, okay, I made it, like this is where I'm at. So at that point it was like, okay. But before that, I was all in trying to make it happen. And that's all I did. I lived and breathed it, and it was my whole life. So, um,
Can I interrupt
I don't
that
know.
thread of thought for just a moment?
Yeah.
And if you're not comfortable answering it, you don't need to. But
Yeah.
when I've worked with some top pros, I always ask them, why do you do what you do? And for the sake of time, I'll paraphrase the whole conversation. But a lot of times the guys are like, well, I don't have an education and this is all I know. Okay, I understand that, right? And then eventually they'll come around and they'll say, well, I do it for the money. Okay, I get that. And then I'll just simply ask them, how much money is enough?
Yeah.
And usually they can't answer that. It'll take a while. And then they'll come back and they're like, well, if I can just make X amount, and then we say, okay, salary, bonuses, blah, blah, blah. Let's put a strategy together to achieve that. When did that paradigm shift in your brain? What was it that you said, okay, I am going to make it? Was it a
Yeah. No,
number? Was it a
no,
championship?
you're
What
way
was
off
it?
for me. It
I
was my
love it.
dream. It was my dream.
I love it.
That's what I wanted to do. That's what I love. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about, I had a backup. I could go to school. I could do something else. I
But
didn't
was it
want to
like a
do anything
third year
else.
with Honda? Was it when you got to the third year, the fourth year, when you finally said, yes, I've done it. I'm good.
Yeah, no, yeah, like that's when okay, I made it. Like this is
Cool.
gonna keep happening, whatever.
Yeah.
But even that, I didn't care. Then I was trying to keep my ride because that was my dream. I love
Yeah.
factory Honda. It was like the New York Yankees. And then the next play,
Amen.
I wanted to be at that point it becomes addicting, right? So then you want to be around the best people. You want to be around the best technicians. You want to ride the best bikes. You want to ride the best is like you just want to be the best because that's your dream. And one thing leads to another, and you're like that was for me, right? So not so much about the money. Like to me, the money was like a tool. It was like, oh, okay, I can build another track. I can get
Absolutely.
this. I can,
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
I'm still the guy who's spending way too much money on bike parts and everything else for me and my kid. So I'm different than those other people.
Yeah.
But that's like what you said, the reward system for me, that's what I don't want for my kid. I want him to
Mhm.
ride because he wants to ride. And that's what I said earlier also, like internal motivation is sustainable. External, whether it's money or your job or fear of that's your only skill, to me, that's a bad way to live. Like
Yep.
it's not sustainable. It's not fun, and you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And then if you get hurt, then you're super bitter. And so I feel like if you teach a kid that early on, that's not going to be good. And I've had teammates like that, that's all they knew was dirt bikes, and that's all they were good at. And I don't envy that to be, and I wouldn't want my kid to be in that situation. So that's why I'm super fearful. And I'm always like, I'm maybe too conservative with my own kid. And that's why I'm like, we're on the fun program. So, yeah,
Do
that's where I'm
you,
at.
so the sport was, I think, a lot different back in your day, a little bit coming
Yeah.
up through, like you said, there was
What year were you at Honda? What year were you at Honda? What years were you
I
at Honda?
started 2004 and I
Okay.
ended the nations 2010. I
Okay.
rode again in 2012 with Larry and Jeremy again back there, but that's about it.
Pardon
So
the
you-
interruption, Derek. I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
wanted to set the tone.
Yeah. So say there was, like you said, the Moto World B, kind of the B program, and there's some
Yep.
B programs now today, but it's like the factory programs are so, I mean, there's 250 class, there's always over 10 factory bikes now. So,
Yeah.
And then I would say the B level programs, we can call club a B level program nowadays. That
Yeah.
would be comparable to maybe your Moto World program. But
Yep.
one of the questions that I think most parents really struggle with, or one of the areas that a lot of them struggle with, is sponsorship, what that means, what that doesn't mean, getting a ride, really the politics of the sport. Did you have to play with that really heavily to get your Moto World ride? Or was it just kind of, the passion came through, people saw that's talent, they saw the Loretta's results, and you just happened to get it?
Yeah. There was a guy, Paul Lindsay, that was the manager and owner of Motor World, and I grew up racing with him. So it wasn't something I was really good at. Wasn't great at communication. I didn't know all the California people. It wasn't like social media. All that stuff's changed quite a bit, like what you said. But I think people, like if I was going to tell parents what to look for and where to go, I would be all about people, the best place for your kid to grow, good mindset, long-term, vision for your kid. All of those things are important. And I'm not super connected with the teams on how that works and where that's going. I feel like if you're a kid on 80, you need to have a long-term outlook, align yourself with people that can give you access to more of the education than the actual resources or money at that point, because the money will come. As we all know, if you win, you can get away with murder, and money comes from all different directions. And but so I really value people. I feel like the people that can teach you and give you the education in riding from the technical standpoint, the training standpoint, all those things are huge.
And then what was the so your amateur bike, was that was a Mitch bike or a PC bike or a Team Green
Yeah.
bike?
Yeah.
And that was like the
bike.
amateur side. We always talk about on the show, obviously it's what I do for a living, but I tell people and they just never seem to listen to me. Like, yeah, it's not the bike. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
it unfortunately it's not, I could tell you that it is, but it isn't. How good would you say your your B bike and your A bike was at amateurs versus what you ended up ultimately getting to be a part of at Factory Honda?
Yeah. Well, my bikes at Lorez, they're built by Dave Chase, who is at Pro Circuit. He's passed away since then, but I actually worked with them again at Factory Honda. But they were so fast, I couldn't control them at Loretta's. I wasn't used to it, But yeah, you could put James Stewart or whoever nowadays. You could put Jet on a stock bike, and he's going to get very similar results, right? And nowadays, the bikes are so competitive stock. I feel like, in terms of the big bikes, that the rider, that's the beauty of our sport. The rider can make up a difference. The hard part is for me as a parent, I know a lot from the technical side, and I've had this discussion with you, Derek. But for a long time, my kid didn't need a faster bike, and it's really difficult for me with suspension. It's hard for me to watch his bike and be comfortable. I can watch another kid's bike and be like, oh, that thing's super soft in the back, and little things here and there. But I've told you this. I send his suspension to Factory Connection. It's super vanilla. It's probably not the best, but I know it's in the ballpark, and they're super good at getting it. Like I said, it's vanilla. It's perfect for him, and it's hard for me because I can't feel the bike. And so I know personally, like I can ride a bike really quick and be like, okay, I want this, this, and this. And I know how to fix it. But for my kid, it's really difficult. And so I value just trying to have the bike balanced. It doesn't need to be super fast. Although I will tell you, your stuff for his motor has been awesome. And I was a little scared. I was really scared of you at first, and I'm scared of anybody. Um, I'm maybe I'm just jaded from the industry or whatever, but I've been super impressed with everything you've helped Hudson with his motor. But it's not the bike. If you get it balanced, it's rideable. You don't want something that's just going to be all up top with the motor, you know this, Derek. But you want something that when the track is deep, it gets rough, it's still connected, and you can ride the bike. And just maintenance. I feel like that's the other thing. It's like I go to the amateur races and they spend all this money on all these crazy parts, but like the chain guide's worn down all the way to the swing arm, or they don't even pack the silencer, or little things like this. Swing arm bearing's gone, or you have a factory shock and the bearing or the collar's missing up top, or like little things like this. It's like, man, the bike would work so much better if little things like this. So, but it's hard, and I'm the kid also who grew up running out of gas in the last lap at Loretta Lynn's. And I understand that it's hard. Like, dude, my dad worked nonstop, but we just didn't know, So I think keeping a bike fresh really will help your kid. And it's not so much about the parts. And
I would take
I
a
don't know.
perfect stock bike,
Yeah.
fresh, perfect, not even suspension, nothing, but everything on it perfect over a 25-hour untouched mod bike any day of the week in the 85 class. Like, people show up to Loretta's with bikes that are, have a lot of cool money and parts into them, but don't function as they're intended to function. It drives me nuts. I'm like, what are you doing? Like it's the, I think the reason is that's the tedious part. You either have to hire a mechanic or do it yourself. You can't just ship out your motor. You got the whole bike is like requires effort. And I think people just overlook that aspect. It truly drives me mad when people show up to Loretta's or Spring National or a regional, and they're going to get their suspension done there, and they've never ridden that setting before. I'm like, and then you're going to bitch about your suspension all week. Well, maybe you should have had a little foresight. You knew what date the races were on the calendar. You should have planned ahead of time, built the bike, put some hours on it, had an idea, because you can't truly understand a bike until you put some time in on it. So, whether it's better or worse.
Yeah.
Andrew, you had mentioned jumping on the pro circuit bike was a rocket ship. What would you say the percentage of difference was between your practice bike and your Loretta's race bike, if you were to put a percentage on it?
Oh, it was huge. It was a completely different bike.
Yeah.
And I couldn't ride it. I was on the clutch because I had so much power. My timing, everything was just off, so it was difficult. I do think now that I'm not super educated on the amateur stuff. It's changed. I'm really specialized. Like the pro side, I can still go back to the races. I've been out of it for 5-6 years, but I can still go back. I know how all that works. I know the people. I know that style of racing. Amateur racing, I am a fish out of water. So I do think at some point a bike does matter. Like I've seen this with the kids, and you get to a high level, and then you do need someone like Derek or whoever you trust and build that relationship with and go and be. That's part of the process. But then there's other kids who can barely get around. And so I think it's hard because you think like you can just buy it, but you can't. And that's the beauty of our sport. It's not like other motorsports or horses or something like that. You're not buying just a horse that can do everything. You sit on it and go.
Yeah.
And I think that's the mentality some parents have is like, oh, we can just buy this and everything's going to click. And there's more to it. So
that's a well said. We say that all the time. Yeah. You cannot buy first place if you're not a first place rider. You can't do it. But you're like, what I always try to tell when we work really in depth with someone and really put the time in, most important value is actually the 1 or 2% that you get right. Okay, let's tweak this. Let's tweak that. Oh, you really like this. Okay. But it's little stuff that makes the biggest difference in comfort for that rider, more so than, oh, wow, this motorcycle is 45% better than your stock bike. It's more like it's 10% better, but it's exactly 10% that you want. It's in the areas that really suit you as a rider well. And I think that's, at the factory level, I'm sure that's really what you're chasing. You're chasing small percentages to fit you like a glove. But I don't think it's, I do believe in the 85 and super mini class, it's pretty big. Like we have some super minis that I think are stupid. I don't even think they should be sold, but they're ridiculous. But once you get to like a 250F nowadays, I really think if you put your time into chassis and suspension, you'll, especially at Loretta's, because it's so tight, you're going to have a really competitive bike.
Yeah.
But Andrew, you bring up something on my side of the wheelhouse, we refer to this as biochemistry. If I take something like creatine monohydrate, if somebody does a creatine load, it will make the muscle contract much stronger. Okay, that's a given. Unfortunately, I could give creatine monohydrate to two different athletes. This one works extremely well, and this one it dehydrates them like a prune. So you can't say that the creatine did or didn't help. You have to look at the biochemistry of that individual. And that's the same way that I look at, you were talking about the idea that the discrepancy between your practice bike and race bike was so big
Yeah.
that the race bike almost becomes counterproductive. I cannot tell you how many people have called me on a Monday morning, had a bad weekend at the races. They're like, we've got to get ourselves in shape. And you just walk through some preliminary conversations, and I'll just use one for the sake of simplicity. You find out that they haven't eaten in 17 hours because they ate dinner at 6 p.m. By the time they got to the track and they got through practice in their first moto, 17 hours has transpired. It wasn't a fitness issue. It was a low blood sugar issue. It was a dehydration issue. It was a poor sleep night. It wasn't even a fitness issue. So you're stepping over dollar to pick up a penny. Like you were saying, you've got this beautiful race shock, and then you don't have the top piece in place. It isn't going to be able to do its job because something's out of alignment. Like you say, the chain guides being out. You're over here messing with something that it's right in front of you. And I hope that doesn't come across as being disrespectful or condescending, but it's just like, to people, it's like, you've got to pay attention to the small details, especially I call it gravitational pull. You know, there's a reason why the space shuttle has 3 rocket boosters on it, because it has to offset gravitational pull. And then once that shuttle gets into orbit, it takes next to nothing. Derek, you may know the number, but if I remember hearing correctly, once the space shuttle's in orbit, it travels at like 32,000 miles an hour with very little to no assistance because there's nothing to resist it.
Yeah.
And you look at the idea of getting off the ground, getting things figured out. Well, when you're getting started, it's not hard to pick up a second or two a lap. Well, you get to somebody at your level, how much would you have given to be 1/10 to 1/4 to a half a second on your factory Honda because of an adjustment to a triple clamp, or you softened something up, or you did something very minute to get 1/10 of a second and be able to maintain that for 12 laps, 20 laps? At the tip of the spear, those incremental improvements are harder to get, and they're more, they're more, I call it more tasteful. They taste better when you get that little bit and you're like, yes. Because I always say, if you don't know how you created that 1/10 of a second, you can't emulate it. If you can't emulate it, you can't sustain it. And I don't want that to sound like a textbook cliche, but to your point, your chain guides are worn out. What nothing else really needs to matter.
Yeah, and continuing with that, I get so fixated on, I picked up a 1/10 or 2 here, but it helped me for, a 2-lap sprint, but for 20 laps, then I couldn't ride it, so
Game
then I would
changer.
fall off after 10 or 15 minutes. It wasn't for lack of fitness, it was because the bike wasn't as forgiving or rideable, and so it's understanding the whole thing. And that's what I always tell my kid, it doesn't matter. All these, it's on race day, all the other stuff disappears. You have to figure out what's going to make you best. And if you're not eating, like you said, or you're changing things on race day, just experimenting or putting all that power into some pre, workout or something like that, and then it goes wrong, just seems silly. So I think that's why it's critical to have good people guide you.
That's
Hey, Andrew,
well said.
real quick. Derek had asked earlier about the navigation of politics. Do you feel agents help or hurt in that category?
I'm super thankful I had an agent early on, because I was uneducated. I didn't know people. And I didn't care. Like I said, all I cared about was that was my dream. I didn't care about the money and all those other things. So I've had a few different agents. Would I recommend one? I think that's different for every person, but ultimately you sell yourself. Your results are what's going to get you a job. So you have to recognize that, straight from the gun. If you're getting results, you're going to have opportunities.
Did your agent do kind of the heavy lifting in the political realm, and it allowed you just to focus on riding, cross training, eating, sleeping, and repeating? Did it kind of create an insulation blanket for you?
It was more just an introduction. Like I purely had an agent based on where I wanted to go, and the guy that I primarily used was really close with the Honda guys. He had relationship with them for lots of people or lots of years, and so that was the guy for me, because that was my dream. He knew Mitch at Pro Circuit, and that covered 2 birds with 1 stone. Those were the 2 places I wanted to be at. But nowadays that landscape's changed quite a bit, I think. And at the end, I got frustrated, and I knew I was selling myself the deals. I knew all the people. I had all those relationships built. I could just use a lawyer, and I was also mindful enough or I was at a place in my life where I knew how all that worked. I didn't really need to be paying for that service anymore. For a kid, I think it's dangerous, but at the same time, maybe it's a good time to separate yourself from mom and dad, to think on your own. And but everybody, everybody's different. This is the thing. It's like there isn't one. This is the beauty of life, right? And part
Yep.
of the adventure and the growing process. And it's no different than getting out of school or getting out of college. You got to sell yourself. You have to communicate. You have to go in there and I don't know how you have to figure those things out for yourself. So I
I
think if it
absolutely
comes from the
love.
writer,
I
go ahead.
don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to add to what you're just saying because it's a high five, big time. I love the way that you aligned the end result. You knew what you wanted and you made the arrangements to make sure that you had the straightest path there. I
Yeah.
love you keep referring to it as your dream. It was my
Yeah.
dream. And I just hope every parent hangs on that comment because you reverse engineered the outcome that you always wanted. And we say that in the physiology world. Success isn't accidental, but it's not guaranteed either. And I love the fact you're like, this is my dream. And I'm keep pinching myself. Am I living my dream? Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'm living my dream. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. So Derek, I apologize. I interrupted you twice there, but I just wanted to get Andrew's opinion on that.
No worries. I was going to ask Andrew. So we had talked about rewards internally. What was a reward for like for your son? We said M&Ms. Is there something that because I have a funny story in that where one of these dads, this kid was probably 10, and he was like, Dad, if I ride my best, can we get a slice of pizza from blah 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 on the way home from Freestone? And I was just laughing so hard because like that was all that kid was excited about. That day was a slice of pizza. So for you, what is something that, other than the riding, which maybe is the reward today? What is something guilty pleasure you have these days?
What's your guilty pleasure, your reward?
Yeah, what do you got, Hudson?
A guilty pleasure?
Yeah, if you do good.
If I do good? Whipped cream on a Starbucks drink.
I always
Sounds
tell them, moment on
delicious.
the lips, lifetime on the hips. That's what my grandpa always told me. So when we go to Starbucks or something like that, I get a coffee and he gets some, I don't know, foo-foo drink. Yeah, coffee frappuccino. I get black coffee or sometimes like a nitro cold brew or something like that. Keep dad life going. So, but normally like after the races, I'm tired, right? Or we're driving. It seems, I've never done so much driving. We've been driving all over the place. So stop at Starbucks, try to get him back to school on Monday morning. So we do a lot of coffee and so I guess that would be his treat, but I don't know.
How about the legend himself, Andrew? What's your guilty pleasure? What do you reward yourself with when you get through the
I don't
weekend?
know. Well, nowadays I'm getting fluffy with dad life, so I gotta watch it. But I just like vanilla ice cream or something like that. I don't know.
There you
I
go.
don't know, what would be my favorite food? I love Mexican. It sounds really bad.
Mexican food.
Yeah, Mexican food, and I like margaritas. I never drank alcohol very much, especially when I
Yep.
was racing. I never did drugs or anything. I was so like I was the kid in high school, like everyone's going partying, and I'm like, it's gonna slow me down. He
Yep.
always give me a
Amen.
hard time about girls.
Yeah.
He's like, girls, slow you down. I'm like, whatever. I don't know what happened. Ours being-
I love it.
That's awesome.
But yeah, so for me, I never did any of that stuff. And when I turned 25, I would have like a glass of wine, red wine at dinner, just because I was reading about health benefits and I was stressed out or whatever, So I never drank a lot, but I love margarita now, especially living in Texas, having some tequila. So that would be my guilty pleasures, I guess. Chips, salsa, Mexican.
Chips and salsa.
Yeah, Hudson says chips and salsa. So
Talking
especially after a good day of riding, that salt.
Absolutely. Yep. Salt,
Talking my
sugar.
language, yeah,
Salt,
that
sugar
sounds
is a
good.
beautiful
Yeah.
combo.
Awesome. Well, if you could, you're not really that heavily into amateurs yet. Maybe this year you will be. Hopefully this year, and maybe moving forward. But from what you've seen so far, we always ask anybody on the show a suggestion that they would have to improve the American amateur system. So is there anything that you would say, hey, this would be cool if the amateur system could improve in this way, or a suggestion, and let's make it a two-parter. And the second part would be, what's a suggestion universally for a family who's chasing this?
I think what's important to me, just from, like I said, we started off the program, we're all a reflection of our past, right? So for me, that's why we're on the fun program. It's like, I don't want it to be too serious. There'll be a time and a place for that if you get there, and I want it to be sustainable. So I think amateur motocross is really in a pretty good place. I've met a lot of cool families. Most of the kids are very similar to like how I grew up racing. A lot of them they'll have lifelong friends. And I look back at the people I raced with and I just smile and laugh, you know, and in a good way. So I think it also taught me a lot of great life skills that transitioned into other avenues of life that have really benefited me. I know how to deal with pressure. I know how to communicate. I know how to deal with failure. Motocross is great for all these things if racing doesn't work out, you know. I think if, you know, you put a motocross kid, he's going to have a work ethic if he got good at it, you know. He's going to know how to handle pressure. So all these things are going to be great for him or her later on. So I think it's a great sport. It's family sport. So it's cool for me to go back. I think they do a great job. Some of the rules are crazy, like this. I'm sure it's even worse in 50s or 60s and all this stuff. But like Hudson has a big wheel on his back and a small one on the front. There's so many silly rules like this now that I'm like, what is going on? Like this just needs to be simplified. And the whole limited thing needs to go back to just being a stock bike. A few safety things would be okay, but the list is like 2 pages long on what you can change, what you can't change. And I'm sure there's some cheating going on, but there always will be. And in the end, you're not helping the kid, you know, for long term. If you're fast, you're going to be fast. You don't need to cheat, I feel like. And some people they will or whatever, but I feel like the limited class needs to go back to being limited, and mod needs to be mod. And I laugh because you see these 50s running this crazy gas and spending all this money and and it doesn't matter. I feel like, you know, it's like at the pro level, yes, but you know, sometimes I laugh, but I also love that 50 parents care that much, have a passion, they want to give their kid the best, and they're enjoying it. I just hope they keep the balance. And same for me. It's like we've done 3 areas this year. I told Hudson next year we're only doing 2 and maybe 1. It's like, if you're not fast enough, then we're not going, you know, but it's like, I went past that point of balance. I'm tired. I haven't been riding as much. And so it's like, we got so consumed with one race lately that it's madness. So I think even for me, I have to reflect and understand, you know, I need to keep a little more balance. And this is a learning experience, trying to understand this whole Litterlands amateur chaos. So yeah, I think it's really pretty good. And I think it's pretty cool to see all these parents there. The races are really cool. They're more fun. You know, to go to Mini O's now is completely different than when I was there my last time in 2000 or 2001. I wish they had the off-road race still, but it is crazy how many people are there. And it's a good time for the kids, and they're doing a good job. Spring and Ding, the playground people, they make it fun. There's cool events, moms, family. So I think it's headed in a good place, and it's encouraging to see, and our industry really needs it. I think amateur motocross is healthy. Power sports is down. I feel like, you know, right now it's not great. You know, a lot of people have a lot of products and just in stock. It's not selling like it was. But you go to these amateur races and dude, it is packed. And that's awesome. You know, I feel like off-road is kind of the heartbeat of motocross, but amateur or of dirt bikes, but amateur motocross is doing well, and it's cool. So I think it's cool for these companies. They can really put an impression on these kids for the rest of their life if they market themselves well at these amateur races. And there's a lot of opportunity for the racers and the businesses as well that are involved in power sports at amateur motocross.
I actually had one more question I forgot to get to earlier. If you,
Yeah.
now that the sport, I mean, the sport has always been Supercross centric, but I'd
Yeah.
say now it's even more so. Like it's sink or swim almost immediately as a rookie nowadays. You better come out
Yeah.
and be fast. So you have the, you know, have had the history of racing it. You have had a facility that has the ability to have a Supercross track. What's your thoughts on when maybe a young athlete should get into Supercross? How you should expose them to that, and you know, just that whole thought process in general.
Yeah, I think they should start on an 80. And maybe that's too early, but I was super lucky and thankful we had a great Supercross series in Colorado. Obviously, riding wasn't great there and we had snow, but we could race in the stadiums. And I raced against a lot of fast kids, all the New Mexico kids. They would all come up and race because we had a good series. But I learned how to bang bars, how to, you know, smash people, how to get smashed, the importance of a good start, how to make moves quick. So yeah, I think the earlier you can start riding, the better. We built a little track at our house. It's super mellow. The on and offs are all rolled, and it's still dangerous, but at the same point, it's for Supercross, it's like controlled in that aspect. But you got to learn rhythms, how to turn down, all those things. So I think the earlier you can start, the better. And sounds bad, but at the same time, it's going to carry over to motocross. I think if you learn it early on, it's more safe instead of just being thrown in and with the pressure, you're like, okay, now I got to perform, you know. If you're turning 16, you get a ride and they just throw you on the real track. It's sink or swim. So if you have the resources, give yourself the most opportunity, right? Or find a place that has one. But Colorado is a great place as a kid to grow up and learn Supercross. Not great for motocross, but I was really thankful later on, and I think this helped separate me from the other kids as I got older. So I would encourage
Awesome.
you to start early.
That's cool. Well, Andrew, on behalf of Derek and myself, we can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge and your experience. We have a tremendous following on this podcast, and we're very thankful
That's
for
cool.
those. You have no idea how much these nuggets of knowledge are going to really move their needle forward a little bit. So both Derek and I deeply appreciate it. Thank you for carving out time, and please be safe this weekend. Have a good time.
Yeah, have
Well,
fun at
thanks. Yeah,
Palo.
thanks for having me.
Take
Yeah,
care.
yeah, thanks.